long-haul trucks for going on 23 years. I started when I was 22, did my CDL training in Fresno where I grew up, and for the first 8 years I ran the I-5 corridor exclusively, north to south and back, the Central Valley route that most freight drivers know as well as they know their own driveways. After that, I moved to a regional carrier based out of Stockton, and my routes expanded to include the Highway 99 corridor, a few runs up into the Sierra Nevada foothills for agricultural freight, and occasionally a run north on the 101 through the Coast Range when we had loads going to the Bay Area that needed to move by a specific time, and the I-5 was backed up from weather or an accident. I am telling you about my routes because routes matter. A driver who knows a road knows it in a specific way that other people do not. You know the sightlines. You know which curves open up into straightaways and which straightaways have dips in them that hide cross traffic. You know where the deer tend to cross and where the cattle ranches have loose stock problems in winter, and where the road shoulders are soft enough to drop a trailer into if you drift. You develop a relationship with a road over time that is physical and instinctual, and that makes anomalies register faster and harder than they would for someone driving the same road for the first time. The night this happened, I was running a refrigerated load of produce northbound on the 99, which I'd done probably 400 times in the years I had been with the Stockton carrier. It was a Wednesday in late October, which is a time of year when the valley fog starts to develop. That thick Central Valley Tule fog that kills people every winter on the 99 because it comes on fast and drops visibility to near zero, and most people are not prepared for it. I had run enough nights through Tule fog to know how to handle it, which is slowly, with plenty of following distance and your four ways going. And if it gets bad enough, you pull over and you wait. That night the fog was patchy. Clear sections and then dense sections and then clear again, which is actually more dangerous in some ways than solid fog, because your eyes and your brain keep adjusting to visibility changes, and the transitions can catch you. I was running about 55, cautious for conditions, somewhere north of Merced and south of Modesto, on a stretch of the 99 that I could have driven in my sleep. Flat, straight, 2 lanes in each direction with a concrete median, the usual valley farmland on both sides, the occasional exit ramp. I came out of a dense fog patch into a clear section, and my headlights picked up something on the shoulder about a quarter mile ahead. My first read was a vehicle breakdown. Something large on the right shoulder, stationary. I began adjusting my position in the lane, moving toward the median stripe, giving it room the way you do when you see a stopped vehicle. And I was about 500 feet back when my headlights got enough definition on the shape for me to understand that it was not a vehicle. It was an animal, standing on the shoulder of the 99 at somewhere around 2:30 in the morning, facing the road. My first thought, and I want to be specific about this because the first thought is usually the brain trying to find the most ordinary explanation. My first thought was horse. Horses get loose from ranch properties along the 99, and they end up on the road more often than people think. And they are genuinely dangerous because they are tall enough to come through a windshield, and they reflect headlights differently than cattle do. A horse on the shoulder is a serious problem, and I began slowing for exactly that reason, dropping from 55 toward 40 toward 35. It was not a horse. A horse's proportions are readable even in headlights at distance. The shoulder height relative to body length, the neck, the head position. What I was looking at as I came down to 30 miles per hour and closed the distance did not have those proportions. It was tall in the way a horse is tall, but the body shape was wrong. Too narrow through the torso. The legs were the wrong shape, too long and too thin relative to the body mass, and they were positioned wrong in a way that I could not immediately articulate. But that read as wrong the way a drawing of an animal looks wrong when whoever drew it understood the basic shape, but not the mechanics of how the thing actually stands. I was down to about 25 miles per hour and maybe 200 feet from it when it turned its head and looked at me. I have been driving at night for 23 years, and I have hit my lights on a lot of animals, and I know how eyeshine works. Different species reflect differently, different colors, different intensities. What I saw when this thing turned its head and my headlights hit whatever it had for eyes was not any color of eyeshine I'd seen before. It was not the green of a deer or the amber of a coyote or the flat red of a possum. It was white. Not bright white, not reflective white, a flat matte white, the color of something that does not reflect light so much as it holds light. And there were 4 of them. 4 points of that flat white arranged in 2 pairs, one above the other, on a head that was larger than it should have been for the body below it. 4 eyes. I put my foot on the brake hard enough to feel the load shift in the trailer, and I came to a full stop on the 99 at 2:30 in the morning with my hazards on and my headlights on the thing on the shoulder. It was about 150 feet ahead of me. It was still turned toward me, all 4 of those flat white points facing my windshield. It was standing completely still. I sat in the cab with the engine running, and I looked at it, and it looked at me, and I thought about every animal I'd ever seen on or near the 99 in 23 years of night driving, and I could not put a name to what I was looking at. The proportions were wrong in too many ways simultaneously. Wrong height to body ratio, wrong leg configuration, wrong head size, wrong number of eyes. The wrongness was cumulative and absolute, and the longer I sat there, the more completely the wrongness filled in around the shape, until the shape itself seemed to be made of wrongness, rather than just displaying it. After maybe a minute and a half, which is a long time to be sitting still on the 99 in fog conditions, I hit the air horn. One long blast. The thing did not flinch. It turned its head back to face the road, slowly, the way you turn your head when you are done looking at something and returning your attention to whatever you were doing before. All 4 white points of light swung away from my windshield and faced north, up the road, in the direction I had been traveling. Then it stepped off the shoulder and walked into the fog to the east, into the farmland on the right side of the road. Not quickly, not in a panic from the horn. It walked the way something walks when it has made a decision and is carrying it out and is not in any hurry about it. Long, deliberate strides that covered ground quickly despite their apparent lack of urgency. Within about 10 seconds, it was in the fog and gone. I sat on the shoulder with my hazards going for about 4 minutes. A southbound truck passed me during that time and did not slow, which meant whatever had been on the shoulder was gone by the time that driver went past. I pulled back into the right lane and I drove the remaining miles to my delivery point at 45 miles an hour, and I did not stop again. I made my delivery. I grabbed coffee at a Flying J, and I sat in the parking lot, and I thought about 4 flat white points of light on a head that was too large for its body, and legs that were configured wrong for anything I could name. I have driven the 99 many times since. I look at the shoulders carefully at night, which I always did, but differently now. I'm not looking for breakdowns or deer or loose stock. I'm looking to see whether the thing I saw that night in October is still out there in the farmland east of the highway, or whether it moved on and I will never see it again. I genuinely do not know which of those possibilities I find more comfortable, and that tells me something about where I am with this after 3 years of carrying it. There is something I have not mentioned yet that I want to mention now because I think it is part of the story. 3 days after the night on the 99, I was talking to another driver in the Stockton yard, a man named Cleve Atwater, who has been driving the valley routes for about 15 years, and who I have known and respected for most of that time. I was not going to tell him what I saw. I had not told anyone, and I was not planning to. But Cleve brought it up himself. He said he had something strange happen to him on the 99 2 weeks prior, near the same stretch of road, and he described pulling over for something on the shoulder that he initially thought was a cow and that he could not identify, and that walked off into the fog when he hit his horn. He said it had moved wrong for a cow. He said the legs were wrong. I told him what I had seen. He listened without interrupting, which is not his usual style, and when I was done, he was quiet for a moment. And then he said he was glad I told him, because he had been wondering if he needed to see someone about what he saw. I told him I had been wondering the same thing. We have not discussed it again. We do not need to. We both know what we saw, and we both know that what we saw was in the same location within 2 weeks of each other, and that neither of us has an explanation for it. Sometimes that is the only common ground you get. Story 2. I drove refrigerated freight for 11 years on the routes between the Central Valley and the Bay Area, and the most dangerous part of my job was never the load, and never the other drivers, and never the weather, though all of those things are real hazards that you manage daily. The most dangerous part of my job was the Altamont Pass at night. My name is Eugenia Teller, and I'm 44 years old, and I drove for a carrier based out of Livermore from my early 30s until about 2 years ago when I left driving to take a job managing routing and dispatch for a smaller regional carrier, which I did partly for the better hours and partly because of what I'm about to describe. I want to be clear that the two things are connected, but I want to be equally clear that what made me stop driving was not a rational decision based on evidence that I could quantify. It was a gut-level response to something that I had no framework for. And I'm a person who trusts her gut, because her gut has been correctly calibrated by 11 years of operating a 40-ton vehicle in conditions that will kill you if your instincts are not good. The Altamont Pass is the stretch of East 580 that crosses the coastal range between the Central Valley and the Tri-Valley area east of the bay. It is a significant trucking route because it is one of the primary access points between the Valley agricultural production and the Bay Area distribution centers. And it runs through terrain that is hilly, windy, and in the summer months, exceptionally hot. The Altamont is also known for its wind turbines, hundreds of them on the ridgelines on either side of the highway, which are visible for miles in daylight, and which at night create a particular visual environment, with their blinking red warning lights rotating slowly against the dark sky. I had driven the Altamont Pass at night probably 1,000 times, but I was not afraid of it. I was respectful of it the way you're respectful of any stretch of road that has specific hazards, but it did not frighten me. The night this happened was a Tuesday in July, about 4 years ago. I was running a load of cut flowers from a distribution hub in Tracy to a Bay Area market that needed them for an early morning market day. This was a routine run. I had done it dozens of times. I was familiar with every curve and grade on I-580 through the Altamont. The load was refrigerated, and I was running on schedule, which meant I was hitting the pass at approximately 1:15 in the morning, which is a time when the pass is nearly empty of traffic. Wind turbines turning, the road mostly clear, the hills dark on either side. I was about 2 miles into the pass, on the uphill section before the summit, when I noticed the animal on the road median. The median on I-580 through the Altamont is a concrete barrier section, a Jersey barrier, and between the opposing lanes there is a narrow concrete strip that is not wide enough for an animal of any substantial size to be comfortable on. Animals do get onto highway medians in California, particularly coyotes and deer, and I know what those look like in headlights. What was on the median strip in front of me was not a coyote and was not a deer. It was low to the ground and long, stretched along the concrete median in a posture that my brain initially parsed as a large dog lying flat. A Great Dane, maybe, or a large mixed breed, but the length of it was wrong for any dog, and even a very large one. It was stretched along the median for what my headlights suggested was about 12 to 14 feet of visible length, and the body was not the rounded barrel body of a large dog, but was flat and broad, like something that had been pressed down. I moved to the left lane to give it clearance, and as I did, my headlights swept across it more directly, and I could see that it was not lying still. It was moving, not rapidly. A slow flowing motion along the length of its body, the way a very large snake moves, a wave of muscular contraction passing from its front end toward its back. But it was not a snake. The head, which I could see clearly as I came alongside it, was wrong for a snake. It was too large and too flat, and it turned toward me as I passed in a way that was horizontal, swinging the whole head toward my cab, and the eye on the side facing me caught the light from my cab interior and reflected it back as something that I can only describe as wrong. Not any color of eye I know, just wrong. I went past it at around 50 miles per hour and I watched it in my mirror until the distance and the curve of the road took it out of my line of sight. In my mirror, it had lifted itself up from the median, rearing the front portion of its body up, still on the concrete barrier, the flat, broad head elevated and oriented in the direction I had gone, like it was watching me leave. The rest of the pass was empty and the delivery was routine, and I drove back to Livermore on I-580 at 5 in the morning in the early light, and when I went through the Altamont in the daylight, there was nothing on the median and there was no sign of anything having been there. I drove the Altamont perhaps 40 more times after that night before I took the dispatch job. Every single time I went through that 2-mile stretch of the pass in the dark, my hands were tighter on the wheel and my eyes were on the median barrier, and I was aware of a specific kind of alertness in my body that I did not feel on any other stretch of road I drove regularly. I told one person what I saw. A driver named Fenton Grass, who had been running the Altamont routes for longer than I had and who I trusted to tell me if I had lost my mind. Fenton listened to me describe the length of it and the motion and the head, and then he said he had heard similar from a driver named Orvis, who had quit the Altamont routes about 2 years before, and I had my experience. He had not heard it directly from Orvis. He had heard it secondhand from a third driver, who had been told by Orvis that there was something in the Altamont that he was not going to drive past again. Orvis had not specified what it was, only that it was on the median strip, and that it was very long, and that it had looked at him. 3 accounts from 3 drivers over a period of years in the same stretch of road. Same location, same median strip. Same basic description of something very long and very flat that moved like it was flowing and that looked at the drivers as they passed. I do not know what that adds up to. I know what it feels like to be inside it. And I know that Fenton, who heard the second-hand account from Orvis, and my first-hand account for me, stopped driving the Altamont night runs within the following 6 months and has not given me an explanation for why. He does not need to give me one. I already know. There is one more detail that I want to include because I have been sitting with it for 4 years, and I think it belongs in the complete account even though it is the part that is hardest to put into a logical context. When I was passing alongside the thing on the median and it turned its head toward my cab, in the half-second or less that I had a clear view of its head and the eye that was facing me, I had a physical response that I have never had before or since in my 11 years of driving and my 4 additional years in dispatch. My hands went cold. Not cold from air temperature, cold from the inside, a cold that started in my palms and moved up my forearms in the second or two after I cleared it. It was gone within about 30 seconds, replaced by the normal adrenaline warmth of a threat response. But in those 30 seconds, my hands were cold in a way that I cannot attribute to any physiological mechanism that I understand. And I have thought about that cold more than I have thought about the shape of the thing, or the motion of it, or the head turning, or any of the other specific details that I have gone over many times. The cold from the inside. That is the part that does not fit any framework I have. Everything else I can put in proximity to something I have an explanation for, even if the explanation is imperfect. The cold from the inside, lasting exactly as long as the thing was visible to me in my mirror, is the part that sits outside every framework I have tried to apply to it. I'm a practical woman and a working professional, and I have no idea what it means. I include it here because leaving it out would be incomplete, and I have been incomplete about this for 4 years, and I am done being incomplete about it. Story 3, 27 years I drove truck. Started at 19 on local routes around the Inland Empire, moved up to regional by my mid-20s, full long haul by 30. I have driven every major freight corridor in the western United States multiple times. I know the roads, I know the dark, I know what belongs in it and what does not. And I'm saying that from a position of having accumulated more hours driving in darkness than most people have spent in their cars total. My name is Reginald Foss. I am 46 years old. I stopped driving long haul 3 years ago, and I now operate a small truck repair and service business in Barstow that keeps me close to home and off the road at night, which is where I want to be. The reason I want to be there, the specific reason, is what I'm going to tell you about. The Mojave Desert on Highway 58 between Barstow and Bakersfield at 3 in the morning is one of the most isolated stretches of road I ever drove regularly. Not isolated the way mountain roads are isolated, where the isolation comes from terrain and difficulty. Isolated in the flat open way of the desert, where you can see for miles in every direction, and there is nothing out there. Just scrubland and sand, and the occasional dry wash, and the 2 lanes of highway running straight and dark to the horizon. When you are the only moving vehicle on Highway 58 in the Mojave at 3 in the morning, you are genuinely alone in a way that the word alone does not fully capture. You are out in the open, with miles of nothing between you and the next human being, and the sky above you is so full of stars it looks like something you would see on a screen rather than through glass. I have always liked driving the desert at night, the clarity of it, the visibility. After years of fog and mountain passes and coastal routes where you are always managing your sightlines, the desert is a relief. You can see what is out there. That is what made what happened on Highway 58 so difficult to process. Not that something was hidden from me. Something was out there in plain sight, on a flat open desert road, on a clear night, and what it was made no sense. I was running a general freight load west, Barstow to Bakersfield, a run I had done probably 60 times over the years. It was April, warm even at that hour, and the sky was cloudless, and the road was empty in both directions as far as I could see. I was about 30 miles out of Barstow, which puts me well into the open Mojave with nothing around me but the scrubland and the occasional utility line running parallel to the road. About a mile ahead of me, I could see something on the road. This is one of the things I mentioned about the desert. You can see a long way. And at a mile in clear weather, my headlights are just beginning to pick up definition on something that size. I tracked it for the full mile as I approached, and I was trying to read it the whole time, running through the mental list of what it could be. Tire debris, which is common on desert highways and comes in all shapes. A coyote, a piece of equipment that had fallen from a vehicle, a Joshua tree branch. None of those explanations survived contact with what my headlights showed me as I closed the distance. It was sitting in the road. Sitting is the word I keep coming back to because it describes the posture better than anything else I have tried. Not lying down, not standing. Sitting with a posture that involved a torso that was vertical relative to the road surface and something that functioned as legs folded beneath it. It was in the right lane, and it was large enough that I moved to the left lane well in advance. Not for clearance, but because every instinct I had was telling me to put as much distance between my vehicle and what I was looking at as I could manage it on a 2-lane highway. I came past it at about 60 miles per hour because I was not going to slow down on that road with that thing in it. As I came alongside it, my cab lights and the wash of my headlights gave me a view of it at close range for about 2 seconds, maybe 3. And in those 2 or 3 seconds, I got more detail than I wanted. The torso I'd identified was real. It was sitting upright the way I described, and the torso was proportioned roughly like a human torso, in the sense that it was vertical and had a definable top and bottom. What was at the top was not a human head. It was too wide, and it sat directly on the torso, without any visible neck, a wide, flat structure that turned toward my cab as I passed. The surface of it, the face, if you want to use that word, was wrong in the specific way that things are wrong when you can see them clearly enough to know that they are wrong rather than just unfamiliar. I have tried to describe the face of it to the one person I have told this story to, and I have not been able to describe it in any way that communicates what I saw accurately. What I can tell you is that the eyes, or what occupied the space where eyes would be on a face, were open and oriented toward me, and were a color that I'm going to describe as the absence of color, rather than any color at all. Not black, the absence of color. Like looking at a place where color should be and finding that simply is not. Below the torso, where the folded legs were, I could see in the passing light that what folded beneath it was not structured like human legs or animal legs. It was folded in too many places. The joints were wrong in number and in position, and the overall configuration of it was the configuration of something that had been arranged to fit into a sitting position rather than something that naturally sits. Like it was making a choice to be in that posture for a reason I could not identify. I cleared it and drove. I did not look in my mirror. I made a deliberate decision not to look in my mirror, and I drove at 65, which was faster than I should have been going on that road at that hour, for the next 4 miles before I eased back to a normal speed. My hands were shaking, which has never happened to me behind the wheel in 27 years of driving before or since that night. I made the delivery in Bakersfield. I ate breakfast at a diner on the north side of town, and I sat in the booth for 45 minutes before I got up and went back to the truck. I drove the return route on I-40 rather than Highway 58. I told dispatch there was a lane closure. There was not a lane closure. I just was not going back on Highway 58 until the sun was up and I could see what was on the road. In daylight, Highway 58 through the Mojave is an ordinary desert road, and there was nothing on it. I have thought carefully about what I saw sitting in the road, and I want to say one thing about it that I have not said to anyone, including the person I told the basic story to. I have thought about the posture of it, the sitting posture with the torso vertical, and whatever it had beneath it folded in those wrong, multiple jointed ways. And I have thought about the fact that when I passed it at 60 miles per hour, it was sitting in the right lane of a highway in the open Mojave Desert in the middle of the night. Not at the roadside, not at the shoulder, in the lane, where it would be hit by any vehicle that came along without seeing it in time to stop. It was sitting in the lane and it knew I was coming. I had been visible to it for a full mile in clear desert air. It had 60 seconds of watching a 60,000-pound truck coming toward it at 60 miles per hour, and it did not move out of the lane. It turned its head toward me as I passed, and it did not move. That is either something that does not understand what a truck is and what happens when a truck hits something sitting in the road, or it is something that understands exactly what a truck is and that a truck doing 60 miles per hour would not hit it, and that is why it did not move. I have spent 3 years trying to decide which of those interpretations is less frightening, and I have not been able to do it. I work on trucks now instead of driving them. I like the work. I know these machines in a way that being under them every day makes more complete than driving them ever did. I know what they can do and what they cannot do, and I know the Highway 58 route in the way that 27 years of driving it has made part of my cellular memory. What I do not know is what was sitting in the road in the Mojave at 3 in the morning in April, or whether it is still out there, or whether it moves between that stretch of desert and somewhere else, or whether the other drivers who run that route at night have seen it, or whether I'm the only one. If I'm the only one, I want to know why. If I'm not the only one, I also want to know why. I want to know what it is about that stretch of road, in that desert, in those specific dark hours, that puts something like that in the lane. That question does not go away when the sun comes up. It does not go away when I'm under a truck with good, clean work in front of me. It sits with me the way it sat in that lane, which is to say, it does not move, and it does not seem to be going anywhere, and it is not afraid of what is coming toward it. That is the most honest way I can describe what it is like to carry this. Story 4. I want to say something before I get into this. I am not a dramatic person. My wife will tell you that. My kids will tell you that. My dispatcher for the 12 years I drove for Cascade Freight out of Reading will tell you that. I'm the kind of man who files his taxes in January, who keeps his truck log current to the day, who does not exaggerate. I say this not because I think you will not believe me, but because I did not believe myself for the first several weeks after this happened, and I need you to understand the baseline I am working from when I tell you that what I saw on Highway 89 north of McLeod was the most genuinely frightening thing I've experienced in 51 years of living. My name is Burton Alcala, and I drove refrigerated and general freight in the Shasta and Trinity County areas for most of my professional life. Highway 89 north of McLeod is a mountain route through the Shasta Trinity National Forest that I drove regularly when I had loads going to or from the Siskiyou area. It is a good road, 2 lanes, well maintained by California standards, running through dense conifer forest at elevation with the occasional meadow opening and a lot of tight curves. I knew it well. I had driven it in every season, including winter, when it can get genuinely hostile, and I had driven it at night many times. What I had never done before, the night of February 14th of 4 years ago, was stop on it. You do not stop on a mountain highway in a 40-foot truck unless you have to. The shoulder clearances are tight in places, the grades are significant, and stopping anywhere but a designated pullout is an invitation for problems. On the night I'm describing, I stopped because I did not have a choice. Not because of a mechanical issue and not because of road conditions, which were clear and dry that night, cold but clear. I stopped because something was standing in the road, and I could not safely go around it without knowing what it was and whether it was going to move. I was northbound, empty trailer, returning from a delivery in Weed, running about midnight. The forest on either side of 89 north of McLeod is very dense, mostly fir and pine with some cedar, and the road tunnels through it in a way that makes your headlights feel like they are cutting into something solid. You do not get much visual range on the curves, and on the straightaways, the tree canopy closes over the road in places and absorbs a lot of the ambient light from the sky. I came around a long left-hand curve and straightened out, and about 300 feet ahead of me in the road, there was something that stopped my foot going toward the accelerator and put it on the brake without any conscious decision being made about it. My body saw it before my brain categorized it, and my body said no. It was standing in the road, facing away from me, upright, 2 legs. The body posture was humanoid in the general sense of the word, meaning it had a vertical torso and a head at the top and limbs below, but the dimensions were wrong in every specific. The height of it, and I am a careful estimator of these things from years of judging clearances, was somewhere between 9 and 10 feet. The torso was too long relative to the lower body. The arms, if you can call them that, hung at a length that would have put the hands somewhere around the knees of a normally proportioned body. The head was large and sat on a neck that was too thin for the head above it, and the head itself was oriented slightly upward, tilted back, as if it was looking at the tree canopy above the road. I stopped the truck at about 150 feet, hazards on, engine at idle. Me sitting in the cab trying to decide what to do with what I was looking at. It did not respond to my stopping. It did not turn. It continued looking up at whatever it was looking at in the canopy above the road. I sat there and watched it, and it stood there and looked up, and the forest around it was completely still. No wind, no animal sounds. The kind of silence that has a texture to it. I sat there for what my dash clock later told me was 4 minutes. In 4 minutes, the thing did not move, and it did not turn, and did not in any way acknowledge that a truck had stopped on the road behind it with its hazards going. It just stood there with that large head tilted back, looking at the top of the trees. Then it moved, and what it did when it moved is the part that I have had to describe carefully every time I have tried to tell this. Because getting it wrong would be worse than not saying it at all. It lowered its head from the upward position. Just the head, slowly until the head was at a normal forward orientation. And then it walked off the road to the left, into the forest, with a gait that covered ground at a speed that was inconsistent with how slowly each individual step appeared to be. Like something whose stride length was so extreme that even slow movement translated into rapid displacement. 3, 4 steps, and it was in the trees, 5 steps and the tree line had closed around it, and there was nothing in the road. I drove through the spot where it had been standing. My headlights showed nothing on either side. No shape retreating into the trees, nothing that indicated where it had gone. The forest was the same dense conifer wall on both sides that it had been for miles. I called my wife from a pullout about 2 miles north. I told her I had seen something I could not explain and that I was fine and that I would tell her about it when I got home. She asked if I needed to stop driving, and I told her I was going to make the remaining miles and then I would stop. She said okay and told me to be careful, and I told her I would, and I drove the remaining miles. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table and told her what I saw, and she listened without interrupting, which is not how she usually listens. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said that her grandmother had been from the McLeod area, and that her grandmother had talked about the forest north of McLeod as a place where you did not go at night and did not stop. She had not thought about her grandmother saying that in probably 30 years, and she said it came back to her while I was talking in the specific way that something comes back when it suddenly becomes relevant. I asked her what her grandmother had said about the forest north of McLeod, and my wife thought about it and said she could not remember specifics. She said it was the kind of thing her grandmother said without elaborating, the way people from certain places say things about certain places without explaining them, because the explanation was something the place itself was supposed to provide. I drove Highway 89 north of McLeod, probably 15 more times after that before I retired from driving, always in daylight. When my dispatcher asked why I was rerouting to avoid the night runs on that corridor, I told him I had been having some trouble with my night vision and needed to see a doctor. He accepted this without question because I had 12 years of reliable service and no history of being difficult. I did see an eye doctor. My night vision was fine. And what I saw on Highway 89 in February was not a product of failing night vision. It was standing in the road, in the beam of my headlights, and it was 9 or 10 feet tall, and it was looking at the tops of the trees, and it walked into the forest in 4 steps and disappeared. That is what happened. I drove that road for years afterward in the daylight, and it is an ordinary mountain highway through ordinary conifer forest, and there is nothing about it in the daylight that would prepare you for what uses it at night. Nothing at all. Story 5. The redwood roads up in Humboldt and Del Norte counties are not like other California freight corridors. I want to establish that before anything else, because the environment matters. When you drive freight through the redwood country at night, you are driving through something that is older and larger than the road, and older and larger than the trucks that use it, and older and larger than anything else in the continental United States. Those trees have been standing since before European settlement, and some of them have been standing since before that, growing out of root systems that predate recorded human activity in the region by centuries. Driving at night through the redwood corridor is driving through something that does not need you there and is not organized around your presence. I noticed this early in my years running those routes, and I always had a particular kind of respect for it, not fear, respect. The difference being that fear is reactive and respect is a sustained orientation. You respect the redwood corridor the way you respect a very large sleeping animal. You move through it quietly, and you do not make sudden movements, and you understand that you are a guest. My name is Hadley Morse. I drove freight for 20 years, the last 8 of them on routes in and around the Humboldt and Del Norte County area, primarily Highway 101 and the various 2-lane connectors that branched off it for deliveries to the smaller communities and the timber operations. I am 53 years old now, and I still live in Humboldt County, which tells you that whatever happened to me on those routes did not make me want to leave. What it did was change the specific terms of my relationship with the redwood corridor, which I will explain. The night this happened was a Saturday in March, about 6 years ago. I was running a mixed freight load from Eureka north on 101 to Crescent City, which is about 80 miles on a route I had driven 140 or 50 times. Highway 101 through the Redwood country runs through a combination of open coastal terrain and dense old growth sections. And in the dense sections, particularly the stretches through Humboldt redwoods and Del Norte redwoods, the trees on either side of the road are close enough and tall enough to create a tunnel effect that is more extreme than anything I've experienced on any other road. Your headlights do not carry the way they do in open terrain. They hit the bases of the trees within a short distance on either side and stop, and above the beam the darkness is total and goes up 300, 400 feet to where the canopy closes. I was in a dense section, one of the old growth passages, running about 45 miles per hour, which is appropriate for that terrain in those conditions, when something came off the road bank on the left side and crossed my lane. I need to describe what I mean by the road bank. In the old growth sections of 101, the road has in many places been cut through terrain that required removing or grading significant amounts of earth, and the result is that the road runs below the natural ground level on one or both sides, with banks rising up from the shoulder. These banks are covered with redwood sorrel and fern and other low forest vegetation, and they range from a few feet to maybe 15 feet in height, depending on the cut. They are steep and vegetated, and nothing large should be coming down them quickly. What came down the bank on my left did so quickly. The movement was at the upper edge of my peripheral vision first, which is what alerted me. A large mass of motion coming down from above and to the left, and I was already braking when it reached the bottom of the bank and crossed into my lane. I cannot tell you precisely how fast I was braking or what my speed was when it crossed, because everything happened inside of 2 seconds, and I was not looking at my instruments. What I can tell you is what I saw in the 2 seconds that it was in my lane and in my headlights. It was large, larger than a black bear, which is the largest animal I had seen on that corridor in 8 years of regular runs. It crossed my lane on 4 limbs, but the 4 limbs were not configured like any 4-limbed animal I had a reference for. The proportions were wrong in a way that I processed in real time as it crossed. The rear portion of the body was higher off the ground than the front portion, which is the inverse of how large quadrupeds like bears and deer move. It moved the front portion low and the rear portion elevated in a way that reminded me. And I'm choosing this comparison carefully, because it is the most accurate one I have, of a person moving on hands and feet with the hands close to the ground and the legs pushing the back end up. Not a person, not shaped like a person, but moving with that rear high, front low configuration that suggested the rear limbs were doing the primary propulsive work and the front limbs were secondary. The head was down. I could not see it clearly. What I could see was that it was wide and that it was moving fast across my lane toward the bank on the right side. And as it reached the right bank, it went up it without slowing, which no animal that I know of does, going up a steep vegetated bank without checking its speed. It went up the right bank the way a person goes up a staircase, continuous momentum, no hesitation, and then it was over the top and gone. I stopped the truck. I was in the road and I stopped the truck, and I sat there for about 3 minutes before I felt like I had the information I needed to continue driving. The information I needed was that there was nothing in the road and nothing visible on either bank, and the forest was quiet in the specific heavy silence that the old growth has at night, which is different from the silence of other forests. Heavier, like the silence has mass. I drove to Crescent City and made the delivery and drank 3 cups of coffee at a truck stop on the north side of town before I drove back. I took the southbound run slow, 40 miles an hour through the old growth sections, and I watched both banks carefully, and nothing. The corridor was empty and ordinary in the way that it is empty and ordinary when it wants to be. I have told this to 4 people over 6 years. My wife, a driver named Cassius Webb, who runs the same corridor and who listened to me without expression and then told me he had seen something come off a bank on the opposite side of the road during a northbound run about a year before mine, and that he had decided it was a bear and had been telling himself that since because he needed a name for it, and bear was the closest name he had. My wife's brother, who did not believe me, but who did not say so, choosing instead to change the subject. And now whoever reads this. Cassius Webb and I have talked about it once since I told him, and once since he told me. Between the two of us, we've been running that corridor for a combined 30 years, and we have seen black bears, elk, deer, ringtail cats, and every other mammal native to that region. Neither of us has seen anything else on that corridor that matches what we each saw on those two separate occasions, on those two separate banks. The Redwood Corridor is old, and it is large, and it contains things that predate our presence there by a span of time that makes our presence feel approximate. I said earlier that I respected it rather than feared it. What I should say more precisely is that I respected it, and then I was given a more specific reason to respect it, which sharpened the nature of that respect considerably. I still drive through the corridor. I still feel the particular quality of those nights in old growth. That weight, that age. I just understand now that the weight and the age have a more specific character than I had previously appreciated. Something uses those banks and that road and those corridors through the trees, and it has been using them for longer than the road has been there. We put the road through its territory and it adapted. It still moves through the corridor. It just moves faster than it should, and it does not adjust its behavior for the presence of freight trucks the way deer and bears do. That is a reasonable summary of what I know. It is also, I have come to understand, probably enough to know. Story 6. Out past Needles on the Arizona side of the California border, the road goes through country that most people only know from car windows at highway speed, the kind of landscape that registers as an absence of features rather than a presence of them. No trees, no hills worth mentioning. The ground has a specific color in daylight, a pale brown that is almost white in noonlight, and at night that same ground has a luminosity under a full moon that makes the desert look lit from below rather than above. You can see a long way in the Mojave out there, a very long way. There is nothing to obstruct your sightline in any direction for miles. I drove the I-40 corridor between California and Arizona for 11 years, and the stretch between Needles and Kingman was the run I knew best. It is flat, it is long, it is empty at night, in a way that no other stretch of road I drove regularly was empty. Between 3 and 5 in the morning on a weekday, you can go 40 minutes without seeing a set of headlights in either direction. When I say empty, I mean empty. My name is Terrence Bowl, and I'm 49 years old, and I drove for Continental Southwest Freight for the better part of 15 years before I left to manage a logistics operation for a mining company in Barstow, which is where I live now. I left driving for several reasons, most of them practical: pay, hours, knees. One of them was not practical. One of them was what I saw on I-40 about 20 miles east of Needles on a Tuesday night in August 3 years ago. August in the Mojave on I-40 at night is hot even after midnight. The ground radiates heat that it has absorbed all day, and the air temperature at 2 in the morning on a clear August night is still in the 90s. I was running a container load east, Barstow to Kingman, a standard run, 12-wheel drive. The load was general merchandise, nothing sensitive. I had made this exact run in this exact season probably 30 times. 20 miles east of Needles, the road enters a stretch where there is nothing. I mean this literally. There is the road, and there is the desert floor, and there's the sky, and those are the only things. No structures, no vegetation beyond sparse creosote that does not read as present in headlights. No elevation change, nothing. It is the most open terrain I drove on regularly, and at 2 in the morning in clear weather, my headlights and the road stretching ahead of me was the whole visual world. Something was in the road about half a mile ahead of me. I saw it at that distance because there was nothing to obscure it, and the desert floor was pale enough that the shape stood out clearly. My first thought at that distance was another truck stopped in the road with its lights off, which would be an unusual but not impossible situation. Breakdown with the electrical failure, something like that. As I closed the distance, the shape did not resolve into a truck. It resolved into something I had no category for. At a quarter mile, it was clearly not a vehicle. It was not tall enough and the profile was wrong. At an eighth of a mile, I could see that it was organic rather than mechanical, meaning it had the irregular outline of a living thing rather than the angular outline of manufactured equipment. At 1,000 feet, I began to see it clearly enough to understand that it was very large, that it was on the ground rather than standing, and that it was moving, not rapidly. A slow, sustained movement that seemed to involve the whole body in a way that was unlike any animal movement I had seen before. A rippling, contracting motion that passed along its length from one end to the other in a continuous wave. I have tried to find a comparison for this motion, and the closest I can get is the way a very large piece of fabric moves in a steady wind, that flowing full-length ripple, except this was muscular and deliberate rather than passive. At 500 feet, I put on my brakes, not hard. A sustained controlled deceleration that brought me down from 65 to about 30 over a reasonable distance. Because whatever was in the road, I did not want to hit it at speed, and I did not want to stop so abruptly that I created a secondary hazard behind me. At 300 feet, I stopped. The thing in the road was, by my estimate, between 40 and 50 feet in length. It was in the right lane and extending partially into the left lane, which meant there was no way around it at normal road width. It was not the same kind of thing as a snake, or I should say it was not only the same kind of thing as a snake. The motion was similar, but the scale was so far outside any snake scale that the comparison felt wrong the moment I made it. The largest snake native to the American Southwest is a bull snake at maybe 5 or 6 feet. Whatever was in the road was 8 to 10 times that length and proportionally wider, and the girth of it at its widest point, which was roughly in the center of its visible length, was somewhere around 3 feet. I sat in the truck at 300 feet with my lights on it, and I looked at it for the better part of 2 minutes. In 2 minutes, it continued its rippling movement without pause, occupying the road at that length and that girth, and it did not respond to my lights or my presence. At no point did either end of it orient toward me. It moved in the way something moves when it has somewhere to be and is moving steadily toward that somewhere. After 2 minutes, it had covered enough ground, moving southward across the road rather than along it, that the left lane was cleared and I could pass. I gave it as wide a berth as the lane markings allowed, and I drove past at about 25 miles per hour, watching it in my left mirror for as long as it was visible. In my mirror, it continued its crossing motion until the distance in the dark took it out of my visible range. At no point did it react to the truck passing within a lane width of it. It moved across the road at its own pace, and the truck was simply not a relevant factor in its movement. I did not stop again until I reached the first truck stop east of Needles, which was about 15 miles further on. I parked under the lights of the truck stop fuel canopy, and I sat in the cab with the engine running for about 10 minutes. There were 2 other trucks fueling, and the attendant was moving between them with his fuel card scanner, and the ordinary specific normalcy of a truck stop at 2 in the morning was the most comforting thing I had experienced in an hour. I bought coffee and I sat at the counter inside, and the woman who served me asked if I was all right, and I told her I had almost hit an animal on the road and that it had shaken me. She said she was sorry and refilled my cup without being asked, and I sat there for another 20 minutes before I drove the rest of the route. In 11 years of driving I-40 through the Mojave, I never saw anything on that road that I could not name except for that one night. Everything else had a category. Coyotes, jackrabbits, the occasional desert tortoise well off the road surface. Once a very lost pelican that I have no explanation for, but that was at least something I could put a name to. What was in the road east of Needles that August had no name that I could put to it with any confidence. I am a practical man, and I believe in practical explanations, and when I cannot find a practical explanation for something I experienced directly, I am honest about not having one rather than inventing one. I do not have an explanation for what I saw in the road. I have a description which is 40 to 50 feet, 3 feet girth at widest, rippling muscular motion, crossing the road from north to south, unresponsive to my presence. That is what I have. Anyone who wants to put a name to it is welcome to try. I have tried for 3 years, and I have not found one that fits all the specifics simultaneously. What I will say is this: the Mojave at night is not empty in the way that it presents itself as empty. The flatness and the open sightlines give you the impression of a landscape that has been completely seen, that holds nothing you have not already accounted for. That impression is what makes it more disorienting than a mountain road or a forest road when something appears in it that does not fit your accounting. In a forest, you expect to not see everything. In the Mojave, at 3 in the morning with clear air and pale desert floor, you expect to see everything there is to see. When something is there that should not fit in the landscape, and that is too large to have been hidden, and that moves with the calm of something entirely at home in its environment, the disorientation is not just about the thing itself. It is about the fact that the landscape you thought was legible was not. The country you thought you knew held something you did not know it held. I live in Barstow now. The Mojave is my home. I drive through it regularly in daylight, and I find it exactly as I've always found it. Beautiful in the specific way that empty country is beautiful, spacious and clear and old. At night, I do not drive through the stretch east of Needles when I can avoid it. When I cannot avoid it, I drive it the way you drive through anything you respect and do not fully understand, which is carefully and with your eyes open and without any assumption that you have seen everything there is to see. I have not. That much I know for certain. I have not seen everything there is to see in the Mojave. That thing crossing the road on a Tuesday night in August showed me that, and I'm not going to pretend I have forgotten the lesson. Story 7, I've been asked a few times since I stopped driving why I stopped, and I always give the same answer, which is that my back finally gave out after 24 years of sitting in a cab, and that it was time. Both of those things are true, and my back did give out, and it was time. What I do not tell people, because telling people is something I have learned to be selective about, is that my back giving out was a convenience that allowed me to stop doing something I had already decided I needed to stop doing for a different reason entirely. My name is Cleston Ward, and I am 57 years old, and I live in Bakersfield, where I have lived my whole life, except for the years when I was on the road, which were most of the years between 22 and 46. I drove for 4 different carriers over that span, starting local, going regional, going long haul, and then coming back regional in my last years because the long haul miles were taking too much out of me. My primary routes in the last 8 years of my career were in the Central Valley and the Sierra Nevada foothills, with occasional runs north into the Cascades region and south into the desert. I knew the Central Valley the way you know your own neighborhood. Every truck stop, every way station, every stretch of shoulder that was wide enough to pull off safely, and every stretch that was not. The run I'm going to tell you about was not on the Central Valley floor. It was on Highway 99 north of Fresno, which is still Central Valley technically, flat agricultural land on either side of the road, but the specific stretch I am talking about is a section that passes through a corridor of dense eucalyptus windbreak on the west side of the road. Trees that were planted decades ago to protect the agricultural fields from wind and that have grown to significant height and density over the years. On the east side of the road at this particular stretch, there's an irrigation canal that runs parallel, and between the canal and the road, there's a margin of rules and low vegetation. I had driven this stretch in daylight and at night more times than I could estimate. The night in question was a Thursday in late September, about 5 years ago. I was running northbound empty trailer going back to the Stockton yard from a delivery in Visalia, which meant I was running light and could move at a good clip. I was on a schedule that had me back at the yard by 3 in the morning. The weather was clear, the fog season had not yet started, and the road was dry and well lit by my headlights. I was coming up on the eucalyptus windbreak section, which I knew was about 8 miles in length, when I noticed something moving in the irrigation canal to my right. I see things in the canal margins regularly, herons mostly, and the occasional coyote working the bank. This was moving in a way that was consistent with a large bird at first glance, a large wading bird working the shallow water alongside the rules. I was not paying it close attention because it was in my peripheral vision to the right, and I was focused on the road ahead. What made me look directly at it was the pace. Whatever was moving along the canal bank was keeping pace with my truck. I was doing 62 miles per hour. A heron does not keep pace with a truck doing 62 miles per hour. I looked directly at the canal bank to my right, and what I saw there is what I've been sitting with for 5 years. It was running alongside the canal and the bank, on the margin between the water and the road, running upright on 2 legs at a pace that matched my speed. I want to be precise about what upright means in this context, because I have thought about it a great deal and I want to say it accurately. It was not running the way a person runs, with the body tilted slightly forward and the arms pumping. It was running with the torso completely vertical, completely upright, with the arms held close to the body or behind the body, and the locomotion was entirely from the legs, which were moving in a stride that was extremely long. At 62 miles per hour, matching my speed, the stride length had to be extraordinary. I am not a biomechanics expert, but I have enough physical intuition from years of working around large machinery to understand that the stride frequency I was observing was lower than it should have been for that speed, which meant the distance covered per stride was much greater than normal. The height of it was difficult to establish precisely because it was in low vegetation, and the canal bank had some elevation variation. But my best estimate based on what was visible above the rules was between 7 and 8 feet of visible torso and head above the bank vegetation. The head was facing forward in the direction of travel, not toward the road. It was not looking at me. It was running northbound on the canal bank, alongside a truck doing 62 miles per hour, and it was looking where it was going. I watched it for probably 8 to 10 seconds before I did the thing that I regret and that I would not do again, which is that I took my foot off the accelerator and began to slow. The moment I slowed, the thing on the canal bank slowed, not abruptly, proportionally. As my speed decreased from 62 to 55 to 48, the pace on the canal bank decreased at the same rate, matching me, adjusting to me. I understood in that moment that it was aware of me, that it had been running alongside my truck not by coincidence or because the canal bank happened to parallel my route, but because of me specifically. It was pacing my vehicle. Why it was doing that I could not tell you, whether it was curious or territorial or engaged in some behavior that I had no framework to understand. I could not tell you. What I could tell you was that slowing down was the wrong choice, and I put my foot back on the accelerator and brought the truck back to speed and looked in my right mirror. It had stopped. It was standing on the canal bank, about 100 yards behind me, upright, the torso and head visible above the rule line, watching the truck go. I watched it in the mirror until the eucalyptus windbreak on the left side of the road cut off my angle of view and I could not see it anymore. I drove that section of the 99 400 more times in the remaining years before I stopped driving. I never saw it again. I do not know if it was there, and I simply did not notice it matching my speed, which is a thought that is more disturbing than the original encounter, or if that night was exceptional in some way and it did not repeat. I know that I drove that section after that night, with my eyes on the canal bank to my right, far more often than traffic safety would recommend, and that every time I passed through without incident, I felt something that I can only describe as provisional relief. Like the absence of it was not the same as its absence. I told one driver about this. A woman named Bertie Comstock, who ran the same valley routes and whose judgment I trusted. She listened to the whole account, and then she asked me two specific questions. She asked which direction it had been heading, and I told her north, same as me. And she asked whether at any point it had looked at me, turned its head toward the truck. I told her no, that the head had stayed forward, facing throughout, and she nodded slowly and said that was probably good. I asked her why, and she said she thought just her feeling, that the looking was the thing you did not want, that the running alongside might be curiosity or territory or something else, but that whatever it was, having it look at you was different. I have thought about Birdie's distinction many times. The running without looking. The difference between being observed and being in proximity to something that is not yet looking at you. I do not know if she was right. I know that it did not look at me, and I am glad it did not, and I am leaving it at that. Story 8. The grape harvests in the San Joaquin Valley run from August through October, depending on the variety and the year. And for those 3 months, the freight moving out of the valley is continuous and intense. Refrigerated loads, leaving for Bay Area and Los Angeles distribution centers at all hours. Flatbeds carrying harvesting equipment between properties. Tanker loads of bulk wine going to processing facilities. It is the busiest freight period in the valley, and the roads reflect it. You are never alone on the 99 or the 41 or any of the primary ag routes during harvest. There is always another truck, except on the secondary county roads that branch off the main routes to reach the individual vineyard operations. Those roads are 2 lanes at best, often unmarked, and at 2 or 3 in the morning, when a refrigerated load needs to move from a processing facility that is 3 miles off the highway. You are the only truck on that secondary road in either direction, and the vineyards on either side of you are dark and still, and the nearest person is however far back the highway is. My name is Ruford Gaines, and I drove refrigerated produce and processed food loads for 15 years. For the last 6 of those years, I was based out of a carrier in Selma, which put me in the heart of the San Joaquin Valley aged freight operation. And during harvest seasons, I was frequently running loads that required me to go off the main highways and onto the secondary and tertiary roads that served the agricultural operations directly. The night of the account I am about to give was in late September during a wine grape harvest on a county road west of the 99 between Selma and Fowler that I had been on probably 8 or 10 times before for pickups from a large winery operation that had a refrigerated storage facility about 2 miles off the main road. The road was straight, paved, flanked on both sides by established vineyard rows, Cabernet on the north side of the road, and something white variety on the south side that I did not know enough about grapes to name. The vines at late September harvest were heavy, and the rows were dense, and the irrigation microjets were not running at that hour. So the road was dry, and my headlights showed the vine rows extending back into the dark on both sides in the particular geometric regularity that planted vineyard rows have. I was about a mile from the winery facility when my headlights picked up something between the vine rows on the north side of the road. Something moving between the rows, which are separated by about 8 feet in that vineyard, moving parallel to the road and in the same direction I was traveling. Moving at a pace that seemed, in my initial read, consistent with a person walking quickly. A vineyard worker, I thought. Early start on a harvest morning, happens all the time. My headlights swept the row openings as I drove, and I was getting intermittent views of whatever was between the rows, a frame of view, and then the vine trunks blocking it, and then another frame. The frames were giving me information that was not resolving into a vineyard worker. The figure was too tall for the frame it was occupying. Not dramatically too tall, but the vine training wire runs at about 5.5 to 6 feet in a mature Cabernet vineyard, and whatever was moving between those rows was intersecting that wire level with its upper torso rather than its head, which put the head above the wire and made the overall height somewhere in the range of 7 feet or more. 7 feet is tall, unusual but not impossible. A very tall person. This is what I was telling myself as I continued at 25 miles per hour on the county road. and the figure continued between the vine rows on the north side. Then it crossed the road. It came out of the vine row opening, crossed the road directly in front of my truck without any apparent awareness of my headlights or my presence, and went into the vine rows on the south side. It crossed in two strides to cover a two-lane county road, which is approximately 24 feet of pavement. I braked hard because it came out of the row in front of me with no warning. For a moment, I thought I was going to hit it, but it cleared my lane before I reached the crossing point, and I stopped the truck about 30 feet past where it had crossed. In the two strides that it crossed the road in my headlights, I saw it clearly. Clearly enough. The height was real, 7 feet at minimum, possibly more, and the stride length that covered the road in two steps confirmed the proportions. The limbs were long, disproportionately long relative to the torso, and they moved in a way that was not quite like human limb movement. Not wrong enough to be immediately obvious, but wrong enough that your eye registered it and sent a signal upward to your conscious awareness that said something is off about the way this is moving. The head was down. I did not see the face. It went into the south side vine rows without slowing and without any adjustment to its stride pattern. The way you walk through a door you know is there, rather than a door you have just noticed. I sat in the truck for a moment. Then I drove the remaining mile to the winery at about 15 miles per hour, and I backed up to the loading dock, and a forklift operator named Theodore came out to help me load. And I told him what I had seen on the road. I described it as carefully as I could. Theodore listened to me, and then he said something that I have thought about frequently since. He said that the vineyard on the north side of the county road had been there for about 40 years, and that the family who owned it had always been strange about the night crews, meaning they did not run night harvesting crews, even during the peak of harvest, when most vineyards ran around the clock. He said he had heard from a driver who had been running this facility for years before he started that the family had told the winery operation that nothing from their vehicles or their crews should be in the county road after 1 a.m. Not parked on the shoulder, not walking to or from the facility. Off the road by 1. He said the winery had always accommodated this without asking why, because the family was a good client. I asked Theodore why he thought the family had that requirement. He shrugged and said he did not know for certain, but that his own feeling was that the family knew something used that road at night, and they wanted their people clear of it. He said this the way you say something that you have thought about for a long time, and arrived at a conclusion about that you do not find pleasant, but that you have accepted. I finished the load, signed the paperwork, and drove back down the county road to the highway. I did not see anything in the vine rows in either direction on the way out. The road was empty and the vines were still, and whatever had crossed in front of my truck was somewhere in the rows or beyond them or wherever it went, when it was not crossing county roads at 3 a.m. in the San Joaquin Valley. I did what Theodore said the family had always required, which was to be off that road by 1. I was off it by 3:30, close enough. I have not been back to that facility since. Another driver covers it now. I did not explain to my dispatcher why I was no longer willing to take those loads. I told him the road surface was rough and it was bad for the refrigeration unit on the truck. He moved me to other loads without question. The road surface is fine. The refrigeration unit was fine. I just was not going back down that county road after midnight, and I was not going to have a conversation with my dispatcher about why. Story 9. There is a stretch of Highway 40 between Barstow and the Arizona state line that I've driven in both directions at every hour of the day and night. And I want to tell you something about that road at night that is true regardless of what I am about to describe, which is that it is one of the loneliest roads in the continental United States after 10 o'clock. Not lonely in a romantic way, lonely in the way that reminds you how small and how temporary your presence on the surface of the planet is. The Mojave on either side of you goes on for distances that your brain cannot process at road speed. The mountains in the distance are 40 miles away, and they look close because the air is so clear, and there is nothing between you and them. At night, those mountains are a black shape against the sky that has more stars than any sky you have seen anywhere near a city, and the road runs straight and flat, and your headlights are the only human thing in any direction. I drove that road for 8 years on a regular rotation, and I found the loneliness of it meditative. I like being the only thing moving in the Mojave at 3 in the morning. I like the clarity of it. I am not a person who is frightened by open space or by solitude. I drove solo long haul for 8 years, and solitude is what you sign up for when you do that. My name is Berthold Nance, and I am 43 years old, and I drove for a carrier based in Barstow that ran the I-40 corridor as its primary route, west to east, moving California freight into Arizona and New Mexico, east to west, bringing back manufactured goods and produce from the Southwest distribution hubs. I knew the I-40 corridor from Barstow to Flagstaff, the way most people know their commute route. Every mile marker, every grade, every stretch where crosswinds became a handling issue, every rest area. About 60 miles east of Barstow, heading east, there's a section of I-40 where the road passes through a low gap in a series of volcanic hills. The hills are not dramatic, maybe 200 feet above the road surface, dark-colored, broken, and weathered in a way that is distinct from the surrounding desert floor. The gap the road passes through is maybe a mile in length, and during the day it is unremarkable, just a low cut through dark volcanic rock. At night, the rock of those hills absorbs the light in a way that makes the gap feel enclosed, even though the road is open to the sky above. Your headlights hit the rock faces on either side and come back differently than they come back off desert floor. The gap has a character that the open desert does not have. I had driven through the gap many times and noticed its character, but never found it anything more than visually interesting. On the night I'm going to describe, I was eastbound, about 2 hours out of Barstow, running a general freight load toward Needles and then on to Kingman. The time was approximately 2:40 in the morning. The road was empty in both directions. I was entering the gap from the west side, the road beginning to rise slightly on the approach grade, when I saw something on the top of the volcanic ridge on the south side, on the ridgeline, standing on the actual crest of the ridge, against the sky. Let me tell you why this was immediately wrong, before I describe what I saw. The ridge on the south side of the gap is not accessible from the highway. There is no exit, no service road, no path that I'd ever observed in years of driving through the gap. The rock face on the south side drops nearly vertically from the ridge crest to the road shoulder. To be standing on that ridge, you would have had to have approached it from the far side, through terrain that is desert wilderness, with no road access for miles in any direction. You would not walk out to that ridge at 2:40 in the morning in August in the Mojave for any ordinary reason. What was standing on the ridge crest against the sky was not there for any ordinary reason. I could see it in silhouette against the stars. That is the only way I'm going to be able to describe it, as a silhouette, because the ridge was dark and the sky behind it was slightly less dark, and the shape was defined by the contrast. The silhouette was of something standing upright on the ridge crest, 2 legs, a torso, a head. The proportions of the silhouette were wrong in the specific way that you can read wrongness in a silhouette that you would not necessarily be able to read in a lit figure, because a silhouette reduces everything to shape, and shape is where the wrongness was most legible. The torso was too long. The arms were too long and were held away from the body in a position that suggested they were extended outward rather than hanging. Not fully extended horizontally, but held out and slightly down, like wings that have been partially folded. The head was large, the legs were long, and the body was standing on the very edge of the ridge crest, which dropped away into the vertical face below it, standing on that edge in a way that suggested it was not concerned about the drop. It was looking down, at the road, at the gap, at me. I was in the gap when I saw it, which means I was directly below it at that point. The ridge crest was above me and to my right, and the silhouette was looking down from the crest, and I was driving the road below. I watched it for the full length of the gap, maybe 30 seconds of visibility at road speed. And in those 30 seconds, it did not move. It stood on the ridge crest with those arms held partially out, and it looked down at the road, and I drove through the gap below it and came out the east side. On the east side of the gap, the road opens back out into open desert, and I looked in my left mirror and could see back to the ridge crest. The silhouette was gone. Whether it had moved or whether the angle of view had changed enough that it was no longer against the sky, I could not determine. The ridge crest was empty of any visible shape. I drove to Needles and I stopped at a truck stop and I ate a meal that I barely tasted, and I sat in a booth and I thought about the silhouette on the ridge and about the arms held partially out and about the fact that it had been looking down at the road below, looking down at the gap, looking at vehicles that came through the gap. Whether it had been there on prior occasions and I had not been looking at the ridge, I could not know. Whether it used the ridge specifically, because the gap below it concentrated traffic and made vehicles visible and slow as they navigated the grade, I could not know. What I kept returning to was the posture, the arms held partially out, the position on the very edge of the crest, the orientation of the head downward toward the road below. It had the posture of something that was watching, not incidentally watching, not catching a glimpse of road traffic while moving through the desert, standing in a specific location at a specific height with a specific orientation that maximized its view of the gap below. It had chosen that spot for what it allowed it to see. I drove the I-40 corridor for another 2 years after that night. I drove through the gap many times. I stopped looking at the ridge crest after about the 4th time through because looking was beginning to feel like an invitation of some kind, a communication I was not equipped to be part of. I drove through the gap and I looked at the road and I did not look at the ridge, and I got through fine every time. But I knew what was up there, or I knew that something was up there and that it used that ridge to watch the road below. That knowledge changed the quality of driving through the gap in a way that I did not find pleasant. It is different to drive through a place when you know you are being watched than when you do not, even if the watching is not malevolent. Even if nothing ever comes of it, the knowledge changes the quality of the road, and I've never been able to drive that gap without feeling the quality of it. I still live in Barstow. I drive a pickup truck now and I take I-40 East occasionally for personal reasons. Every time I enter the gap, I look at the road and I do not look at the ridge, and I come out the other side and continue on. It takes about 90 seconds at a highway speed to transit the gap. 90 seconds during which I am below the ridge crest, and whatever uses that ridge has a clear view of whatever's on the road below. 90 seconds. I have done it probably 40 times since I stopped driving long haul. It goes fine every time. I just do not look at the ridge. That is the only adjustment I have made, and it seems to be sufficient. I recommend it as a policy for anyone who drives I-40 through that gap at night. Look at the road. Do not look at the ridge. Keep your speed steady and transit the gap, and come out the other side and continue on your way. Whatever is up there will see you regardless. The looking up at it is the part that feels like a choice. Do not make that choice. Just drive through. If you are still here at the end of this one, then you are already part of what this channel is trying to do, which is give these accounts somewhere to exist outside of the heads of the people who have been carrying them. Subscribe to Park Ranger Files and hit the notification bell if you have not already. New accounts go up regularly, and the ones we have coming are some of the most genuinely disturbing submissions we have received. Every account is read personally before it goes anywhere on this channel. If something happened to you out on a road or in backcountry or anywhere else that you have not been able to explain, the submission link is in the description below. Tell it the way it happened. Do not dress it up. Just tell it straight, and we will handle the rest. We will see you on the next one.